It's 6:12 in the morning, and Mark is already awake, though nobody told him to be. The coffee maker clicks on because he said it the night before, the same way he said it for 11 years. Outside, the street is empty except for a neighbor's dog and a sky that hasn't decided what color it wants to be yet. Mark stands at the counter in a t-shirt from a race he ran in 2009, holding a mug he didn't have to think about reaching for. There's no music, no podcast, no voice but the low murmur of the refrigerator. He likes it this way, or at least he's told himself he does for so long that the line between liking it and being used to it has disappeared completely. He'll check his phone in a minute. Not because he's expecting anything. He just likes to know that nothing has happened while he wasn't looking. This is a man who has built an entire life on being fine. Not happy necessarily. Not sad, either. Fine. Steady. The kind of man other people describe as solid, without ever quite being able to say what's underneath the word. He'll go to work today, handle whatever needs handling, come home, and do it again tomorrow. If you asked him how he's doing, he'd say good, and he wouldn't be lying, not exactly. He just wouldn't be telling you the whole truth, because the whole truth would take more words than he has ever learned to use. Watch him for a week and a pattern appears. He answers texts quickly but starts conversations rarely. He remembers everyone's birthday but doesn't expect anyone to remember his. He fixes things around the house before they're asked of him. A leaking faucet, a squeaky door, a flickering bulb, as if competence itself is a form of communication. In some ways, it is. He rarely says, "I miss you" to old friends, but he'll drive 4 hours to help one move a couch. He has opinions about nearly everything and shares almost none of them unless directly asked. At dinner with family, he's the one refilling water glasses instead of leading the conversation. He notices when someone else is upset before they say a word, and he'll quietly do something about it. A cup of coffee left in a right spot, an errand run without being told. But when he is the one who's upset, the room goes quiet in a different way. Nobody asks. He doesn't offer. There's a kind of fluency he has in reading everyone else's emotional weather and an almost willful illiteracy when it comes to his own. If you've recognized any of this so far, you are not imagining a stranger. You are watching a pattern that has quietly written itself into an entire generation of men. He keeps a mental inventory of everyone else's stress, their deadlines, their kid's recital, their mother's surgery, but couldn't tell you, if pressed, what's actually been sitting on his own chest for the last month. He measures a good day not by how he felt but by how much got handled, as if productivity were its own quiet proof that everything is under control. This didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen in a vacuum. Mark grew up in a decade that taught boys to be useful long before it taught them to be understood. Fathers who worked long hours and said, "I love you" through actions, a fixed bike, a full gas tank, rather than words. Mothers who often carried the emotional load of the household while sons watched and absorbed, without anyone meaning to teach anything at all, that feelings were something women managed and men simply didn't have, or at least didn't mention. Friendship for men of this generation was built through shared activity rather than shared disclosure. You bonded over a car engine, a fishing trip, a case of beer and a game on in the background, not over how your week actually felt. Vulnerability wasn't punished outright so much as it was quietly unrewarded, met with a joke, a change of subject, an unspoken discomfort that taught a boy faster than any lecture ever could. And then the culture around him kept reinforcing it. Movies where the hero absorbed pain silently and never explained why. Workplaces where composure was rewarded and openness was, at best, tolerated. A social contract that told men their currency was reliability, not openness, and that being needed was a fine substitute for being known. Even the language available to him was limited, a handful of words for anger, a handful for pride, almost none for the quieter, harder-to-name feelings, the ache of watching your kids grow distant, the strange grief of a friendship that simply expired without anyone deciding to end it. And so the friendships thinned, not through any single dramatic loss but through 1,000 small omissions repeated across decades. Studies on adult male friendship in recent years have found something startling. Men report having fewer close friends now than at almost any point in recorded history, and the ones they do have are often built more on proximity and shared logistics than emotional intimacy. Somewhere between the last close friend from college and the acquaintances who fill a calendar today, most men simply stopped practicing the muscle of closeness because nobody ever told them it was a muscle that needed practicing at all. It's easier to explain this in numbers than in feeling, but the feeling is the part that matters. It's the quiet math a man does at 48 when he realizes the last person he had an honest conversation with about how he was actually doing was someone he hasn't spoken to in 6 years. He'll scroll past that person's name in his contacts sometimes, thumb hovering for a second, and then keep scrolling, telling himself it would be strange to reach out now, too much time has passed, there'd be nothing to say. But that's rarely true. There is usually plenty to say. What's missing isn't the material for the conversation. It's the permission he never gave himself to start one. Here is where the story gets more complicated than most people are willing to admit. Because Mark and men like him didn't choose isolation out of coldness. They built it as protection. A boy who learns early that his sadness makes adults uncomfortable will learn to hide the sadness rather than lose the adults. A boy who is praised for toughness and quietly corrected for tears will begin to conflate the two, believing that toughness is simply the absence of visible feeling rather than the presence of resilience. This isn't weakness of character. It's a survival strategy, engineered by circumstance and reinforced by reward, that worked exactly as intended. The tragedy is that a strategy built for a 10-year-old boy trying to keep the peace at home doesn't dissolve on its own once he becomes a 50-year-old man sitting alone in a quiet kitchen. It just keeps running in the background, indefinitely, long after the threat it was designed for has disappeared. It's worth sitting with that, because it reframes something people are quick to call a flaw. The steadiness, the self-containment, the reluctance to ask for help, these were once the smartest available response to an environment with no safer alternative. The problem was never that the boy adapted. It's that adulthood never sent the memo that the danger had passed. This is where the contradiction lives, and it is not a small one. Men like Mark want connection. Genuinely, deeply, sometimes achingly. And yet, offered the chance to be vulnerable, they will often choose distance instead. Not because they don't feel the pull toward closeness, but because vulnerability has been coded, since childhood, as danger. He'll think about calling an old friend and put the phone down. He'll sit in a room full of people who care about him and say nothing about the thing that's actually been sitting on his chest for weeks. He misses people he never reaches out to. He wants to be understood by someone he refuses to give any material to work with. He aches for exactly the thing his own habits are quietly preventing. This isn't hypocrisy. It's a nervous system doing what it was trained to do, protecting a man from a risk that statistically stopped being a real threat decades ago, but that his body has never been told to stop guarding against. And so he stands in his own kitchen, surrounded by a life he built competently and alone, wanting company he doesn't know how to ask for. It shows up in smaller ways too. He'll say, "I'm around if you need anything," to a friend going through a hard time, genuine and generous. But he'd never say the reverse, would never admit he might need something himself. Giving support feels safe. Receiving it means admitting the ground under him isn't as solid as it looks. What would it actually cost him to say the true thing out loud? Not the polished version, not "I'm good," but the unfiltered one. What is he actually protecting when he keeps his inner life a private country that no one else has a visa for? Is it possible that the very strength he prides himself on, the steadiness, the self-sufficiency, the refusal to burden anyone, has become its own kind of cage, one he built the bars for himself and now mistakes for shelter? Why is it that a man will handle a health scare, a job loss, a divorce, almost entirely without support, and call that dignity, when a woman doing the same thing would likely be encouraged to lean on someone? Why does silence get mistaken for maturity? And what does it say about a culture that a man's loneliness can go completely unnoticed by everyone around him, including most days by himself? Maybe the truth is this: strength and vulnerability were never actually opposites, only made to look that way. A man doesn't lose his strength by being known. If anything, the ability to sit inside discomfort and say the true thing anyway requires more of it than silence ever did. Silence is simply easier to mistake for control. The real difficulty isn't feeling less. It's that so many men were taught to feel privately, to carry the entire emotional architecture of their lives without a single witness, and to call that independence rather than what it more often is, which is a very quiet kind of exhaustion. Mark will finish his coffee. He'll rinse the mug, set it in the drying rack the way he always does, and go about his day exactly as he has for years. Nothing dramatic will happen. No one will ask him if he's all right, and if they did, he'd probably still say fine. Somewhere in that ordinary morning, though, is a man who has spent a lifetime being reliable to everyone except himself, standing in a kitchen that is quiet in the particular way a life becomes quiet when it has been built, brick by brick, to need no one. The dog outside barks once at nothing in particular. The sky finally decides on gray. And the coffee maker, without knowing anything about any of this, clicks off, ready to do the exact same thing again tomorrow.